Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson,
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line.
and it's been an exciting couple weeks here, Carson. We've actually got to talk about some books
Yeah,
recently, huh?
except I didn't record the one last time, so we had to do a quick run through. But yeah, it's nice to get back to talking about books. I like interviewing everyone, but we like really haven't read many books together lately. So this is a good return to form.
Right, back to the Living the Line book club special, and my goodness, this is a quite the one. I had no idea this book existed. We read this week Petrograd by Philip Gelatt and Tyler Crook, and uh, Philip Gelatt is the writer, and Tyler Crook is the my goodness exceptional artist.
Oh, I knew you were gonna like that.
Wow, I mean, what's not to like? My God, this guy has been around and I didn't know who he was. I don't have any excuses here because this came out in 2011. This is not within my dark period of not reading comics. You
And
know,
this is honestly, and I feel like I've seen his more recent work, and so this seems like a step back for me. Like it's
you
really
serious?
good, but if you like this, then you need to check out his more recent work because he's improved even further. Yeah.
My goodness. So this came out with from Oni Press in 2011, and I mean it's meticulously researched, quite amazingly drawn, and also the drawing is obviously meticulously researched. And the only thing I could think when I was doing this was like, my goodness, how did they get the funds to put this together? And then I was like, Oni had a few blockbuster successes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
they
I mean I think they had
Scott Pilgrim.
yeah, but I think they also collapsed in Top Shelf at some point, didn't they? And then they got bought out by IDW. I think they've kind of had a few like mergers here and there. Um,
I was
but
just
yeah,
trying
I
to.
mean, obviously, it's like this really nicely produced book with the like canvas on here and the gold foil and nice hardcover. Really nice, like heavy matte paper that it's printed on that really makes it look like watercolor on the art. So yeah, it's a hell of a production too.
Right. And you can just see the sort of deep research in each page. But rather than talk about it, let's actually take a look at the book itself, shall we?
Yes.
So this was suggested by one of our patrons, Eric D'Amico, and voted in by the rest of our patrons. And thank you guys for voting this book. I just never, I don't know how I would have encountered it otherwise. But man, I mean, you can see from the jump here that how engaging the art is. He's got a really wild style. I almost immediately was thinking about there's a different types of dualities that people present at various times. That obviously, like every duality is false, but they could be useful framings for thinking about things. And I've heard the duality: you're either in the Kirby camp or the Eisner camp,
Oh.
um, and you could sort of divide up some types of cartoonists like that. And obviously, this is in the Eisner camp. Uh,
Yeah,
both
Eisner and Paul Pope were like the two big kind of frames of reference for me. I think like this
interesting.
this opening stuff is very like Paul Pope to me. Just like kind of the crazy brushy looseness of some of
Mhm.
the panels like this. But there is a like when he goes to faces and stuff, there's a like slicker kind of approach. It's not quite rough enough to be Paul Pope or Eisner, which
Mhm.
is weird within all the looseness. That you get a slick, it's almost more like Chris Sprouse or an artist like that, like this really um those really slick, really kind of tense artist, which is strange because nothing about this is tense.
Yeah, and it depends on the era of Eisner you're talking about, obviously too. But that it looks a little bit more like studio, era Eisner, where he had a more
Mm-hmm.
controlled brush mark for the figures. Here's our first our encounter with Rasputin, who is the one of the main characters. I don't know if you'd call him the main character.
I was thinking
assassination.
about that last night. Is this a book about Rasputin, or is this a book about the figure Cleary? It's really about
Right.
Cleary.
Yeah,
Uh,
so the book follows Cleary, who is a British spy and is also essentially like a counter spy. He's working for the Russian government as well,
yeah.
and he it turns out later is also himself Irish, of Irish descent. But anyway, he is involved in a plot to essentially overthrow revolutionaries because he sees his government sees the czarist government, the Russian the Russian king and queen essentially as beneficial to their monarchy as well. That monarchies are essentially going to, stick together with each other, and so he's essentially working undercover as a counter-revolutionary. But as we see fairly early on, he's actually sexually involved with a revolutionary.
Hmm.
And
And his Irish descent, like his, the kind of Irish versus English thing, I think rides
right,
underneath like his uh kind of sympathy towards the
yeah,
revolutionary.
yeah. I mean, he's a complex figure, but the actual plot of the book it basically is involved with the plot to kill Rasputin, who is essentially like a spiritual figurehead and a spiritual advisor to the czars, the ruling class, and
This especially the czar's wife, the Tsarina,
right,
um,
yeah, and
which is
the
strange.
the implication is that they have some kind of sexual relationship, and they get into some of the rumors about Rasputin early on, and I think he's a really interesting figure, and you can see that that they really his encounter here with Cleary, where Rasputin is a above him, and a lot of the angles are attempting to communicate some of the power that he had as a figure. On one hand, he's this kind of crazy looking, unwashed guy with a big unkempt beard and obviously like matted, oily hair. On the other hand, he's got this kind of otherworldly intensity to him. And this was an interesting time for this kind of thing. I think that people in the sort of modern era discount this type of personality, this ability of some people to influence other people who are around them. I think that is a really common thing to sort of discount now. But I mean, this is a real phenomenon, and people at this time were very engaged with that. There's a very interesting uh, case, and a guy that Rasputin definitely benefited from was a German gentleman. I don't remember his first name, but his last name was Mesmer, and he was a German doctor that was basically like, "Oh, I can mesmerize people. This is what I'm going to call this thing."
That's where we get the word from. Yeah.
Exactly right. I'm going to call this thing after myself. And he basically invented what I mean, not invented because these things have been around as long as people were around, but he basically codified this technique of attempting to heal people by mesmerizing them. He would essentially like hypnotize or influence people to do various things. And this was in the 1850s. This book is set 60 years later, but Rasputin was a similar kind of figure in that he seemed to press his will upon other people. And in the case of like
Well, and
the
at the same time, you have like the Helen Blavatsky doing the Theosophy
right,
Society. You have Aleister Crowley as like the wickedest man alive, being a huge public figure in the early 1900s. So there's a lot of precedents for charismatic mystics.
right, and as we'll see when we get to the actual assassination attempt, he there are legitimate reasons to think that he was an exceptional person.
Yeah, for sure.
So Cleary is essentially trying to influence this other royal of his acquaintance to kill Rasputin, and he gets the back channel approval of this move, and influenced by his other, the other people that he works with. So here's his boss coming in on him sleeping with his girlfriend, who's a revolutionary, and
and and telling him like you're going to kill Rasputin, and Cleary's like, what? Like, I'm not qualified for this. Like, I'm not, I'm good at getting information. I've never killed someone. I don't know how to do this. And it's like, well, figure it out with your couple like reprobate transvestite friends. And he's like, they're not qualified either. What are you talking about? It's like, well, you guys will be fine. But if you get caught, then like me and you are just rogue agents in the English government. And Cleary knows. He's like, bullshit, like it's gonna fall on me. And he's like, no, it'll be fine. Let's go ahead and do it. It's like, okay. So it's a failed attempt from the beginning almost. Well, it's gonna be bad for Cleary from the beginning.
Right. So Cleary picks out this guy who he is another royal who, like you were saying, dresses in women's clothes. He has, it seems as though he has a bunch of relations with basically everybody. He lives like this is the typical class division of the people who are at the very top do whatever the hell they want to. And he tries to persuade this guy, okay, you're going to kill Rasputin. He's like, you even suggested it to me earlier. And he's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, that sounds like fun. But he goes about it like he's planning a party or something. And it's clear that he has told everybody about this. Which is, Cleary just thinks it's just bonkers. Like he goes to the guy's house and he's like, oh, and here's so-and-so, he's going to use the knife, and here's our poisoner.
Yeah. And he's like, dude, you're supposed to keep this quiet. Like, this is how we get caught.
But so that they're gonna go through with the plan, and in the meanwhile, Cleary is clearly having some type of crisis of conscience, and he gets his girlfriend to stay with him for a couple days in order to have her avoid a bust of the other revolutionaries that she is working with. He knows is coming.
And so that obviously pisses her off because, like, well, you could save me, but none of my friends.
Right.
And it just all kind of, I don't know, it all kind of cascades south fast for poor Cleary. I wanted to go back to, there was a page, because you were talking about the class division, and I thought there was a really cool moment where they made that clear early on. I think this is Cleary in the trenches at the beginning of the book in 1916, and then you make a time jump to Russia, but you have Cleary here in the trenches with his hand, opening this can that they're talking about. Like, we don't even know what's in the cans. Like, you just kind of open them and it's like whatever's in there is what you get. And then you flip the page and it's pretty much the same picture, but now you're in England, in Whitehall, with the wealthy eating the steak. The people controlling the war. And I thought that was just a really powerful, like, flip 1-2 visual there.
Well, and it's obvious that some of these things must have been dictated in the script. And if you look and see, the writer writes for film as well. I don't know if he's had any films produced, but that's how he's billing himself as a writer for film and graphic novels. And it seems fairly obvious to me that this would be a very compelling movie, and this possible.
I'm surprised. I mean, it has to have been optioned or something, or maybe this is like what they were turning to when they made that new Kingsman movie that had Rasputin in it. I don't know. I mean, the story of Rasputin's pretty commonly known too, so I don't think you don't need to get this book to make your Rasputin movie.
Right, but it's tightly wound. They wound this very, very tightly. So you see the actual assassination attempt there at the beginning of it, and they've poisoned this wine, and they've poisoned these biscuits and these sweets and everything, and they've just used a ridiculous amount of poison, and Rasputin is just gulping it down, waiting for this man's wife to come so that he can, have his magical way with her.
He's been promised that he can show her some new tricks. That's how they got him here. But when I was reading this, I was thinking Rasputin had to be walking into this like suspicious as hell. Like come get in my car with me, come to my party, here's these people. Oh, when we get there, all of a sudden it's not like the situation that I thought it was going to be. You know, Rasputin's expecting to go jump in bed with this dude's wife, and then it's like, oh no, she brought guests over, and we have a big, like, there's all these people, like, just, oh look, Rasputin's here, and they're like, why don't you just come downstairs and, like, here, why don't you drink this? I'm not gonna have any.
Hang out in
And
the pantry.
yeah,
Here's
like,
wine just for you.
as
Yeah,
as a Machiavellian mastermind that I'm understanding that Rasputin was supposed to be, with his influence in the court, like, he must have just been like looking at these idiots. And I don't know how historically accurate this story is either. I
yeah,
don't think the characters are the right, the situation's right, but I don't think the characters are right. But I
yeah. I'm not.
imagine Rasputin must have been being like, you fucking idiots, like, I know what's going on here. Like, he was probably like tossing the wine, you know, they're like, oh, he drank all this wine and ate all these cakes. He probably either had inoculated himself to cyanide already, or he was like tossing shit over his shoulder because it was so obvious what they were doing.
Yeah, so I don't know about the machinations of it and how much of that is fictionalized, but as far as the actual uh, details of his death and all the other things that they're leading up to it, those are definitely 100% to the historical record. And we're going to get to how he actually dies, but he definitely consumed vast amounts of poison because when they did an autopsy on him, they found it in there.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Because
so
I went, after reading this, I was like, okay, I know I've heard all this about Rasputin, but how much of this is just like myth? You know,
uh,
over time, he's a character who was like Crowley, you know, there's a lot of stuff that gets tagged on to him later just because he
right,
was so wild. And the from what I could find, the account of how he dies is written by one of the people who assassinated him.
right,
And that's like the one account that everyone kind of relies on. So there's a bit of question about
okay,
how much that account was exaggerated,
gotcha.
because it could make, you know, oh well, we killed the devil man, right?
Right.
Like, this is how hard this motherfucker was to kill. He was
Well,
definitely a devil,
and he
but it
had
could be
been
real.
he had survived multiple assassinations before
Previous, yeah,
this,
yeah,
including like a vigorous stabbing. So
yeah, yeah.
wait, and you can see like that's the angle that they're going for in the story here. I mean, he just absolutely thrashes these people. um, and you know, once again, like I know this is something that I'm supposed to be skeptical of as a modern person, but I believe this. I believe that there are. I mean, you know, I there are people who are the top 1% strongest people. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
and you don't necessarily know who those people are until, you know, Bill, who works with you, picks up a refrigerator and tosses it into a dumpster in front of you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You think you're one of those 1% people, and then here comes Bill, and he walks up and lifts the refrigerator over his head. I mean, you know, these people are real. And the question of whether or not one of these people happened to also be a, you know, mesmerizing sex pervert. Uh,
Which is like, it seems very likely that you're an extraordinary physical specimen.
right,
You're gonna live, like, not, you're not going to, but the odds are of you living a wilder life are higher, I
right,
would imagine. Like, I would imagine oftentimes, probably not all the time, but oftentimes someone like that is also like chemically inclined towards extreme behavior.
right.
You
Yeah,
know, like, I mean,
absolutely.
that's where you get the UFC fighter
Hmm.
and the Tyson Furies and Mike Tyson's, and, you know, that's where you get those people. You can punch them in the head a million times, they don't go down. They're
Right,
drawn to conflict. So
right.
yeah, I totally believe that there was this guy that, you know, and people can train themselves slowly. If he was involved in these kind of machinations, it's not surprising that he slowly increased his tolerance to poisons and stuff.
So,
So
so, so as you can see, it takes a dinner party worth of people to bring him down outside, and they believe kill him by shooting him in the head,
yeah,
uh,
stab him in the back,
poison him. Uh,
poison him, clobber him with the candlestick, chase him out into the snow,
and then finally to drop him into the ice. But then this quite incredible panel of him. Oh, jeez, this action scene.
This whole scene right here, the art
It's
is
just
this is where you
unbelievable.
really get that like loosey goosey, energetic Paul Pope vibes, I think. And then I knew you were gonna like it too because it's got all of this like second spot color,
Yeah.
watercolor stuff that I know you've been playing with a bit lately.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, and they've got the second across. And this is actually interesting to me because I had never seen this before, but I had a long conversation with Matt Battaglia. We're putting out Matt Battaglia's House on Fire coming up,
I
and
thought of that immediately.
right. We had talked a lot about how to pick that spot color, and I just told him, like, this is a hot story. This is not a cool story. Like,
Hmm.
it's gonna look weird if this is all in blue or whatever. And
Yeah,
similarly here, even though the whole thing takes place in the snow or whatever, it needs the hot color, the warm color,
yeah.
because the story itself is a story of conflict. And I don't know, everything about the way that this is put together is just really masterful. Um,
Yeah, this immediately that with the Paul Pope and that second spot color with I immediately thought, oh, this is like kind of like Matt's book too. And yeah, I remember Matt had initially his instinct was to go with the blue,
right.
and we tried like you had him try it with that reddish orange, and it immediately was obvious to me too. Like, yeah, that's way better, that heat.
Right.
Yeah, and same with this. You're correct. Like if you imagine this being blue, it just doesn't the violence of that is so red,
Yep.
and you need that even on the calmer panels like these, the
Right. So
consistency.
basically, he dials down the intensity by using a lighter wash.
Yeah, he just waters it down, which is
Right.
genius, really
Yeah.
genius. And you can see also uh Tyler Crook's ability to like paint
Yeah.
realistically. So when I was saying that he, like, you haven't seen some of his more recent work, he goes more full color, and it's
Mm.
the rendering with the color is more like this type of thing with the lots of pile up of different color, like you can imagine that in color, and like a little bit more realistic use of light and things
Mhm.
like that, but then the same type of drawing underneath.
Yeah.
um
This light-wise, this is the other remnant of the Eisner style that I was kind of getting towards. It's
mhm.
got a theatrical use of light, and when you need to see something clearly, you see it clearly, and when you need to be obscured, it's obscured. It's more like stage lighting where you do everything you can to communicate the feeling that you want from the light. There's not a spotlight on them here, literally, is there?
Yeah.
It, yeah, so they're doing this assassination. Next door is the police, and so of course the police come by, and
Because they hear gunshots.
right. Everything okay in here, guys? Oh yeah, we're just having a party and we shot at a dog.
Yeah, we shot a dog. That's why there's blood all over the backyard. All right, cool. But I mean, they were royalty, right? So the
Yeah.
police are coming to kind of their higher ups house.
Yeah,
And that's,
the chief assassin is a prince. Um,
yeah, so it's more believable that the police are like, okay, sir, like you're above me. Like, I'll believe your dog story. Get
yeah,
on with your night.
not only was this, this is actually, there's a really famous court case. The reason that you always see films say, based on a true story, or, you know, whatever, all these different types of exclaimers, declarations that have become at the beginning of films, is because there was a really famous film that came out in the early 30s that was called, I don't remember what it was called, Rasputin, the Mad Monk, or something like that.
Mm.
That the czaress and the assassin sued
Oh,
for being depicted
wow.
in the film, and she was like, "Oh, I didn't have a sexual relationship with this man. I never met him. He lived down the street from me." Like, um,
Wow. I didn't
and
know that.
yeah, a lot of the testimony of the murder comes from the testimony of the murderer at the trial.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I read, his testimony about like how they killed him. But
right, but that
again,
was
it seemed a bit suspect that he was like trying to ramp up how demonic Rasputin was. So the details that he gave seemed a little sus.
yeah. Well, so the thing that is definitely the case, and here, will you give us that one There we go, right there. So you see his arms open up like this. And so the
Yeah.
thing that I have always heard, and as far as I know, this is accurate to the facts, is that Rasputin died of drowning.
Oh,
Uh,
he wasn't dead when they threw him in the water.
when you have a dead body that you throw in the water, um, you have different amounts of fluid in your lungs than a person who is drowned, because a person who's drowning inhales the water,
Mm.
and so you have inflated lungs. That's my understanding of it anyway. And so after all those things that happened to him, this man died from being in the water.
Oh, really? Okay. Because when I read it, when I went and read, like, I finished this last night and I was like, okay, I gotta know. This is like you watch a biopic movie and you're like, go to the internet immediately. Um, in the real story, they shot him in the chest a few times and then like brought him back to his house. I think they brought Rasputin to his own house to like stage a scene or something.
Oh,
They
okay.
brought him somewhere else thinking he was dead, and he popped back up and started fighting him again. And then they shot him in the head 3 times, and then they dumped him in the river. Uh,
Okay.
so they had already thought he was like dead once and took him somewhere else. I think it was his own house, but it could have been someone else's house.
You know
And then like
what?
he,
Yeah, you looks like that you are correct. The autopsy report does not mention poison or drowning. I have been
oh,
promulgating I've been promulgating the report of the assassin. The
yeah,
devil.
yeah, that's what he told him, is we poisoned him a whole bunch and nothing happened. So then we like attacked him and got in this fight and shot him in the chest and thought he was dead, and then brought him somewhere else. I think to Rasputin's house was his account. He pops back up, starts fighting again, then we shoot him in the head, and then we toss him in the river. um, was what the guy told him. But
Right.
again, what I read said like there's kind of different accounts and they're kind of competing.
Yeah.
um, so I don't
All
know.
right.
That's a
Well,
very Eisner drawing though, right there.
sure is. Yeah, it really reminds me of the last panel of the Schnabel short story, where the guy who can fly uh, has never used his powers in front of other people, and then he flies, and then he's shot by somebody and drifts down to the ground dead.
Is that an Eisner story?
Yeah,
What Eisner is that in?
it's a spirit short story. Uh,
Oh, okay. I haven't
Schnabel.
read all the Spirit.
Okay, it's great, but it's got that sort of floating, you know, character to it.
And then I like that later in the book, and that's where we were saying, is this, it seems like a story about Rasputin, but really there's like, once Rasputin is dead, there's this much of the book left that's
Right.
about the fallout, and particularly the personal fallout for Cleary, where exactly what he suspected was going to happen happened, is that this caused an international situation, and the monarchy, the British government wants to divorce themselves from this. His superiors didn't know what was happening anyways, so they can easily say they didn't know. And his immediate superior, who was like, oh yeah, trust me, buddy, you take the fall with me, comes back to him and is like, hey, go fuck yourself, like, we're leaving you in Russia, figure it out. And so he starts engaging in these other kind of machinations to get himself out of the situation.
Right.
But here has to run and falls in the ice, and I really love that
Yeah.
resonance through the book. And again, another very Eisner drawing. That's the most Eisner drawing right there. This page is Eisner through and through. All 4 or 5 of those panels.
I think we should talk about the inheritors of the Eisner, you know, approach as well, in terms of not just the rendering but the acting. The other person who I've been thinking about recently is Craig Thompson. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't really know that his work has been directly compared to Eisner all that much. I'm actually kind of disappointed at the lack of critical engagement in the visual aspects of Craig Thompson's stuff. Uh,
Yeah.
but I think that he's a real inheritor of that spirit.
I see some of the like the Suge stuff in here too, like some of the manga that we've been reading that Ryan has translated. I don't
Right.
know how much Tyler Crook has been exposed to that and how much of that was influenced by Eisner. Like who knows how the influences go, but I see some of that Garo stuff in here as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that the panel there at the bottom of him walking away, right there with all the negative space around him and just the impressions. I mean, that could be straight out of Contract with God.
Yeah, and both of these feel like they could be out of one of those Yoshihiro Suge books to me for some
Hmm.
reason. Something about those two and kind of this one, but these two, this is like Eisner through and through. And
Is
this
it
is
because of
almost a
the
mix of Eisner and the Suge.
you're thinking the Suge because of the abstraction of the architectural form?
Something about the figure more,
Okay, interesting.
like particularly this figure and the brushwork on the characters and stuff. I don't know. That's just while I'm staring at this, it's jumping out at me more and more. Anyways, so you just get kind of the end just rolls down like the consequences on Cleary's life, and then there's a suggestion that he's going to head back to Ireland and help a revolution start there as well, because throughout this whole process of being shunned by his government and going through this whole experience, he's obviously been radicalized himself a little bit. um, that to me was kind of the suggestion here at the end, where this gal that he'd been sleeping with, who was a revolutionary, kind of tells him like, what are you? Are you a spy or a revolutionary, an opportunist or a reactionary?
Mhm.
What are you? And
And
then
we should say he pushes the Russian Revolution there. I mean, he essentially tells them this is your opportunity.
yeah,
These troops are coming back. They are not favorably disposed towards the ruling government right now. Like you guys can do it, um, and pushes them over the edge.
yeah. And so you get the sense that he's been radicalized through all
Yeah,
of this, and that's really what the story's about. And I find that interesting. I mean, it's hard not to get sucked up into the Rasputin thing because it's such a legendary story, and like the details as presented historically make him seem crazy, but
right.
in the end, yeah, it is about Cleary.
But
um
and I would say that they keep a distance from the myth pretty heavy here. Like even that right
yeah.
there. I mean, you could just interpret that a lot of different ways. I'm choosing to have the interpretation I did because that was the apparently disputed information that I was coming to the discussion with.
But
However,
that's the standard narrative about him,
right,
though. It's like the accepted one. That's why I was like, I didn't even like when I started reading this and I realized it was about Rasputin. I was out in sometimes I read in my office, sometimes I read out with Tori, and I was out there with Tori, and I said Rasputin's like a legit historical figure, right? Because it's been mythologized so much that I was questioning myself on that.
right.
Like, is this just a mythological figure? And she was like, yeah, he's real. I was like, okay. I'm gonna have to read the internet after I'm done with this book because this is wild.
They keep an aspect of plausible deniability in terms of the most. You could just read this and not come with it with anything else, and just think this guy was you know, a guy who took advantage of the situation or whatever that he was in. Um,
And going online, and again, this was maybe 10 minutes I spent. I didn't do a deep dive
yeah,
research, but reading the account of his death, I didn't see anything about an involvement of a British agent named Cleary.
right.
And the names that I was seeing in that article weren't striking bells. I don't even know if they named the cross dresser in
Right.
here.
No.
Um, so I think all of those characters are just entirely made up. I don't think that's they do have a very small like biography or bibliography in the back
Right.
of books that you can go to like follow up on the history of Russia at that time and Rasputin, but it's not like from hell where they're putting like these super thorough notes. They obviously did their research, but I think even more than something like From Hell is this is much more fictionalized than even that.
Well, it's a heck of a read, either way, and
I had
very
one thing I wanted to ask you about before
yeah.
we wrap up. One conversation in the book that I thought was interesting, and I thought we probably have different responses to.
Okay.
Um, so he's sleeping with his revolutionary girlfriend here, um, and she says, "Do you remember the day we met?" And he says, "Strike, yeah, I do." "Why did you pick me to approach?" And he tells her, "The bandages on your feet, they were torn to shreds, black with filth. You did not care. It was authentic. You were authentic, a real peasant." And I've always been skeptical about this, I think pretty common, um like, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but like, uh,
A trope.
the trope of the authentic, or the kind of urge that seems to be in the culture to strive for the authentic. I feel like that's generationally something that we grew up through, especially
Hmm.
like late Gen X, early millennial. I feel like that word authenticity was something everyone was chasing after. And it's never made sense to me what exactly that's supposed to indicate. Because you'll hear things like, "Oh, it was authentic. You were authentic. You were all in tatters." But like, is it not also authentic for Donald Trump to be doing what he's doing? Like, that's authentically who he is, right? Or like,
Yeah.
you'll say, "Oh, Lady Gaga, she's such a sellout. She's not authentic." It's like, I don't know, Lady Gaga, Nicki Minaj, like Britney Spears, that's authentic to me. They wanted to be a rich pop star. Um,
Right. Yeah.
and
So,
so this idea that authentic is only like the poor and dirty and stuff is just kind of silly to me.
well, I think I think the first thing that I popped into my head when you said this is a conversation that I had with my wife when we were first dating, where we were walking by a window display or something, and she saw these really grotesque, open-toed shoes that had like these crossing leather thongs in a complex, fashion with like a, jewel on top or something, And she made some joke about like, you think I should get some of the, or something along the lines of like, should I, what would you think if I wore those? And I said something along the lines of like, well, I would never date a person who wore those. and and for whatever reason, it hadn't occurred to me until it sounds harsher than I'm saying it,
Yeah.
but for whatever reason, before I said that, it had never occurred to me that there were certain items of clothing that were so associated with a certain type of person in my mind that somebody that had that item of clothing on, unless it was under duress or on Halloween or something, would not be somebody who I would be interested um, in that way at all. So that's the thing that popped out of my head, is that essentially he's got this like filed away in the back of his head somehow as something that is marking her as a person who does not belong to some other kind of group that he's avoiding.
Yeah, it's just an interesting, and I think it gets tied to, I think it's accurate that it's getting tied to a socialist revolution here, because I oftentimes when I hear that term, it is coming from uh people who are more inclined to revolutionary activity, or like anarchism.
Sure.
Like there's this desire to turn to the authentic state of being, like not so much reality, or not society, civilization, technology and stuff, in the way that somehow the natural state is more authentic. And even that, like, natural versus artificial, it's like, I don't know, like, this is what humans naturally get up to, is will eventually make computers. And
Sure.
I also don't see the difference there. So I've always just thought that was a funny idea. But I feel like I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like you're you're more into like Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan. And I remember you talking to Tim Lane about Van Morrison album,
Mhm.
and I think you guys were even talking about the authenticity and like the kind of like folksy nature of it or something, the purity of it. I
No, there's
forget.
no. It's something about the improvisatory nature of it. You
Okay.
know, you can hear the thing being created in real time. Yeah, no, I don't have a big truck with authenticity, except in the fact that, certain kinds of things get wiped out by technology, and that's distressing. That we can't hear what native singing sounded like in different parts of the world because everybody has K-pop now. uh,
Okay.
that type of thing is distressing to me from like a sort of historian perspective, or even just like a appreciator of things. As a musician, like, you want to be able to know, like, what did something sound like, because each of these things can be an ingredient in your future thing. So yeah, I'm not so much caught up on the idea of authenticity, like you just said here. I mean, I talk about this all the time when somebody says something is organic or whatever. It's like, well, cyanide is organic.
Yeah.
uh, I mean, it just doesn't mean anything. It's a meaningless thing because it's an organism. Okay.
Like that organic automatically means healthy.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, my
And
dog's shit is organic too, but I don't
right.
buy that for extra money at the grocery store.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
must have been like that improvisational thing that you were talking about, where it sounded like you guys were really into like the maybe immediacy of it
Mhm.
was more what you were getting at. That
Well,
was interesting.
something sounds different when it's like on the tip of your tongue. You're creating the
Yeah.
thing as it happens. I mean, it's not that much different than like some of the really ink performances that I admire, where you can see the backstroke and stuff as the person is trying to figure out the form as they're actually creating it. You know, I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I know people who are really into Van Gogh's ink drawings, and to me, they always looked like a big old mess because they don't, he doesn't quite work the page in a way that leads your eye. But then, I started really enjoying him when I realized that you could see the pen deteriorating as he was making the page.
Like he was too so aggressive.
Well, yeah, I was using like a reed pen, and it gets blunter as you're going,
Mm,
because you sit down and sharpen it up, and it's nice and
yeah.
sharp when you start, and then it gets blunter and blunter and blunter through the drawing. Anyway, it's a similar kind of thing. Like there's a sort of like high wire aspect to something being created at the same time. On a practical note, it's possible that Cleary also was looking for an authentic peasant so that he could manipulate the person easier. Uh,
Oh yeah, and in context of the story, like I get it in that sense. It was like you were actually a peasant. You weren't someone who was like a counter agent
right.
pretending to be poor. But yeah, I think in the context of the story, it was more like that. But because, like I said, I've always kind of encountered that discussion when I'm hanging out with people who are more revolution minded, anarchistic minded themselves. They see it. It just struck a chord with me that it was like, and then I was remembering like some of these conversations that you've had with guests about music that
Mhm.
suggested to me this interest in, I guess, immediacy is probably more what you were after. But it was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I want to ask Sean about that because
Yeah. Well, but the thing about the authentic, I mean, the thing about music is that there are musical traditions that don't exist anymore, or
yeah,
aren't passed down anymore, and got wiped out by the quote unquote sophisticated. I think that that's more of a media problem, though. That's just what happens when you can transmit things from one part of the world to the other. So it's not like I'm longing for some state where you had to build your own violin and pop a rattlesnake uh, uh, rattle in the bottom of it to keep away the devil. It's just that somebody who learned in that tradition played in a way that's not going to exist anymore
yeah.
at a certain point, and that those are sort of valuable input to somebody who's wanting to make something new. You know.
Yeah, and I mean, same with painting. There's a lot of knowledge that went missing that we're having to, I mean, I think people have pretty much recovered it all by now, but I remember even in the late 90s, it was very, very hard for me as someone who was interested in academic realist painting to get any kind of information about what mixtures were they using,
Right.
like what color palette were they using, what was their glaze medium made out of, like what was their approach to layering, you know, that were they using like a, were they doing more layering, were they doing like sticky into sticky painting, you know, like now I feel like all that stuff's, there was a big effort for the last 20 years or so to recover that, and we've recovered a lot of it. But that's just a process of time too. Like we're always going to be losing some information. I guess now we're lucky that we can, in a digital society, we can at least start keeping records of it all. You
Right.
know,
And
it may
people
not
people
be
don't realize
analog, but
sometimes, yeah, but like people that talk about like the, historical search for Jesus, let's say,
yeah,
don't realize the advantage that researchers have today versus people are like, oh, but this guy in the 1200s thought this, and it's like, well, that guy in the 1200s lived his entire life in a 30-mile radius from his village,
yeah,
and had access to 6 books. Uh, and the people who are working today have access to, like, if they have enough money, they have access to everything that was, still exists.
like spectroradiographic decay. Yeah,
Exactly
yeah,
right. I mean, it's just, yeah. But this is a slow process, and this is only in the past, like you're saying, like 2 decades or whatever, that has been aided by the digital dissemination instead of hindered by it.
yeah, yeah. And obfuscated at the same time, because just the proliferation of information makes any bit harder to find. I've noticed that with my students. Like I knew more about how to get to where I wanted as an artist than most of my students do, because we had a centralized source for information, Wizard magazine. That, I mean, seriously, like if
Yeah,
you wanted to
sure.
draw comic books and you grew up in the 90s, you know what you had to do. And you had lessons that were coming, and
Yeah,
you know you needed to go to the Kubert school, and you know you needed to go to conventions and show people your portfolios and all that kind of stuff. They don't know none of that now. They should, because it's on the internet. They should have easier access to way more education than I did, but it's so much harder to find because there's no centralized location. So I'm always constantly like having to catch 21-year-olds up to where I was at 13, just
right.
because they don't have the magazines anymore. So it's
Or
like a
books.
weird trade-off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Uh,
we're far afield, as we will do. But I don't know, actually not too far afield, because this is a book that's a bit about history and having to dive through the historical record to piece together a story. So it's
right.
dealing with those factors. But yeah, enjoyed the book. Really enjoyed the art. And I think more than anything, it was just the story of Rasputin was so compelling, and they presented it in a compelling enough way, like a really good biopic movie, that then I wanted to know as much as I could about the real story.
Right.
And I think that's the hallmark of a good biopic or a good biographic comic, is
Yeah.
they've sold you on the character
Right.
really well.
So go out and read that, and after that, I believe this is going to be airing a week from now. So very
Mhm.
soon, you're going to be able to preview another book, another graphic novel that was based on a true story, as it says in the book, very, very, very loosely, which is the new Living the Line book, Centralia by Miel Van de Peet. And we're going to try something new with this, totally different. We are going to pre-sale the book on our website, which is livingthelinebooks.com. So you should be able to very soon buy buy a copy of Centralia by Miel Van de Peet. And like normal, we're going to use those pre-sales to hopefully pay for the print run of the book, and be able to get it into comic stores and bookstores near you. It's a very exciting book, a very interesting book, essentially like an adventure novel in a very heated world. Someone has described it as essentially like a graphic novel version of the kids' game, The Floor is Lava.
Yeah, that's perfect. But then it gets like, okay, then you also map a kid's wild imagination on top of that. And I think your description of it as a young adult Moebius is
Right.
like perfect for it, in terms of the type of story and the way the art looks.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and you're doing this so people understand what's going on, in place of a Kickstarter.
Yes.
So instead of going through Kickstarter, you're basically doing the same type of pre-sale fundraiser. You're
Yep.
just running it through your website now and instead of through a secondary source.
We will give that a shot and see how it goes. Yeah.
All right. So prove to Sean that this is a fantastic idea and that we don't need someone else to sell our books for us, that Kickstarter is pretty much there to put the creator directly in contact with the audience anyways. And now that we already have direct contact with our own audience and Sean has his own website, why do we need Kickstarter?
Well, yeah, we'll always need Kickstarter at some point in time, I think. But yeah, we'll give this a shot and see how it goes. I'm very excited about the book anyway.
Let's test this real direct to the audience comics model here. This could be a good thing for creators. So yeah, and also when's do you have a release date for Matt's House of Fire? Because I think people that are fans of the artwork in this book, you know, that like loose, dry, brushy kind of approach, then with that second warm spot color, would really enjoy Matt's book as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking that will most likely be, I believe, on the schedule right now for late March.
Okay.
And so the book itself will be, you know, once again, we'll give it a shot and see exactly what type of pre-sale, but either Kickstarter or pre-sale on the website if the Centralia one goes well. And,
okay.
Yeah, I have to be totally frank here. I really wish I had paced all of these things out, but there were just various reasons that it didn't make sense to be able to do it that way. And so it just happens to be that these books are coming out 1 month, 1 month, 1 month. You know, I'm taking some comfort in the fact that people are going to have different books that they like and different things are going to be appealing to different people. And have had tremendous support from Diamond and Diamond Books, DBD, Diamond Book Distribution. Has been really helping and make sure that we get the word about the books in the different markets, and yeah, so we'll see what happens. But I'm super excited about all 3 of the books.
So. Yeah, me too. All right, everybody, thanks for following along. Take it easy.
Take care.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.